Okay, hey y'all, what's up? How's it going? How are we feeling? I'm Ryan. I wanted to make a recap, reflection on London Fashion Week. I don't know if you guys knew, but I went to London Fashion Week this season. Wait, let me stop you there. How's everybody doing? How's everybody feeling? A long time no talk. My mom just told me, she's like, you need to film a YouTube video. I was like, I'm trying, I just got home. I really wish I could travel and film and edit, but it's just like when you're catching up with the jet lag and the time difference, and then you're working and then you're writing and then you're documenting all this stuff, it's like, bro, please. But yeah, I am back from London, Iceland, France, London and Paris Fashion Week. I came home after London Fashion Week, so then I readjusted to New York, and then I went back out to Paris. And so my brain is like all scrambled when it comes to time, so that's why I wasn't able to upload my reviews. But yeah, we're starting with London Fashion Week. I like the authentic sense of like fellowship. Kept going to runway shows and seeing people like hug and catch up on actual parts of their life. And I sometimes find that it's missing from New York and Paris because they're more oriented around like posturing or hierarchy, doing the hierarchy tango, doing the dance of like, I need to sit here like this and behave in this way to establish that I'm this. And I'm like, okay. You guys know I love status and culture, so I'm never mad about it. It's just interesting and more fun to me to see the other stuff sometimes. I also like seeing the brands that have this kind of like visceral connection to the streets that's discernible in the work, but when you're physically there and you can see and feel how they're connected and where their roots physically go, I really appreciate that, right? Especially when they're receiving funding that they deserve. I love the newgen designers as well in London. Since 1993, they've supported designers like Alexander McQueen, Connor Ives, Grace Wills Bonner, Kim Jones, Jonathan Anderson, and more recently Tolu Coker, Aaron Esch, Sinead O'Dwyer. I love all of the incubators that they have in London to support up-and-coming designers, and I think it's really important. It really drives the creative visions and representations of the spirit of London. So we're going to talk about London shows. Cheese. These are my show notes that I got from the shows that I went to. This is the DAUAN JACARI pamphlet. I was so glad to get one. I want the money. I want the money. It says on the back, just jeans and a t-shirt. Season 2, The Royal Court. My thesis, my perspective on the show is that it's a simultaneously futuristic vision into, but also current reflection of the existing spirit and beauty of dance, nightlife, and club culture, which are just like ways of exchanging energy that I think are really essential to infiltrate the fashion world. And I think I've been talking about this with Crystal O'Yeary's work in terms of art making. Okay, I have to set the scene for y'all. So I walk up to the sound of a bunch of kids squealing on bicycles. There's these children toddling to like volley soccer balls between each other, and then they're guarded by these mothers standing around them that are acting as like the boundaries, the perimeter of this like makeshift concrete field that these kids are playing in outside of this, what I find out is a community center. To me, it was also reminiscent of the show last year for DAUAN JACARI that followed the Fashion Week season, and it was set at the Lesbian and Gay Community Services Center. I really liked, being in a community center space and thinking about like what other things do they host here to serve their community and what kind of safe space is this. And I kind of like that open invite, ephemeral spirit of the dance floor that it captures, because it's a similar thing. Sometimes you go to these RSVP only, invite only, like industry insider events and parties, and again, people are not as cool or well dressed or as interesting even as just like a cool party that you just have to know somebody to get into. That's how you can curate a group of people. It doesn't have to be about this form of like exclusivity that's based on hierarchy and power and status. The next section is the vibe. The energy at the show was really warm and bright, buzzy, chatty, friendly. People were really outgoing. Someone was like, are you shy? They were stylish, but without pretense. That's essential. So then the show started, right? Everybody's cheering and whooping and hooting and hollering. They're snapping throughout the shows. There's throughout the shows. There's people adding their own witty commentary and whispering it to the side. It reminded me of being at church. Where like, even though you're at church and you're supposed to have reverence for what's going on and you're trying to be serious, like sometimes you do make jokes at church. Okay, so in terms of the show starting, right? The show starts. I loved this buzzy sense of mystery and confusion that I felt before it started, because they're such an elusive, mysterious, sexy brand. They feel like a secret crush, and I have a secret crush on this brand. So the show starts off with our narrator speaking and setting the scene. It flowed into some sexy catwalking and flamboyant, seductive movement work. Each model was like harnessing the energy of the room, transforming it internally, and then sharing it back to us. It was like this cyclic kind of reverberation and processing, even like synthesizing almost. I felt like I was a part of like a broader machine or something, like the machine of love and energy and whatever. It was just very cool to be a part of. Keiyaa also walked, so did other icons. I thought that was fab. The casting was really on point, and it depicted the scene, you know, using actual creative ingenues, you know, like actual fabulous people who are working towards creating important work as well. The designs were also fab. So, you know, they've set the scene. You guys know I kind of like this world building culture much more than just like the idea of community because you've done a brand activation or some shit. They've really built out an elaborate world. I loved the esoteric t-shirts. Those are like the standout. And apparently that's like the word of the year of the season, esoteric. I like the shirts with dynasty over dishonor. They kind of reflect the tone of the tale told through the theatrics that we were there to witness, Miss Thing. There are these casual and sporty tees that were paired with the drop crotch denim, which is the DAUAN JACARI signature at this point. I love that drop crotch pant and jean and sweatpants silhouette. It is just so fabulous to me. I kind of like that it's like constricting but completely free, limiting the way that your feet can move. It's just very funny, and you know, I think it's a real valid contradiction. And then we see these flowing logo-clad draped casual dresses that are paired with this gorgeous over-the-knee hosiery in loud colors. Los Angeles Apparel has opened up a standalone store as well with the return of hosiery, because I think people don't really think about this, but in the 2010s that was kind of the brand that drove, I'm speaking Mr. President, American Apparel was one of the brands that kind of drove the interest in over-the-knees, hosiery, socks, stockings, etc. Like they kind of made that into a trend when other brands didn't, and then Urban Outfitters and other like multi-brand retailers, etc., followed suit. But I think it's cool for us to be accessorizing and like hyper specific in our accessorizing at this point as well. I think that's cool and fabulous. I love the club fashions that were paired with the DAUAN JACARI logo boots. I thought that was very interesting, very slick. I love the little details. I've talked before about how I like an elaborate house. Loved the logo riffing D&J, just like the D&G logo. To me, it felt very black, right? You see this like 70s flair, kind of blaxploitation and 90s club wear, business casual aesthetic. It seemed like Nollywood inspired. It seemed African-American inspired. There was like this global diasporic inspiration that was like this unifying way of designing at this collection. I thought it was fab. I also loved the unique proportions and appearances of all the models and these like very tailored garments, these different ways of storytelling through each of them. Also, the story was just really fabulous. I don't want to spoil it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what the exact story was, but there's a good lesson there. You know, don't give away the thing and don't give away your fashions. In terms of like my conclusion about the show, I just like this energy of, you know, the ephemeral, the value of things that are like temporary and being in the room at the time. And it doesn't have to be exclusive based on status and hierarchy and power. Sometimes something is beautiful and special because you were there. It could be a free entry into a club, but because you were there, that's what was so special. I've talked before about how I've talked to different DJs and sound curators and artists who work with music and sound, and they're like, yeah, like, I don't care what the circumstances are. No one can record the set. You were there or you weren't. And I'm like, oh, shoot. And I love that. It's like, if you're in the community, you will hear about the event through word of mouth. So you're welcome to come. It's not about exclusion, but it's also not about broadcasting and benefiting and capitalizing off of that, right? Not for the shows that I go to, but sometimes I watch runway shows and I'm like, imagine the work it takes to put this whole thing together when it could have been a more interesting just presentation. It's just something people think about the valor of having a big show, like a traditional runway show, like boom, 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 big lights, big cameras. And it's like, maybe there would be a more creative way of presenting this, but people think that there's like a distinction in presentation versus traditional runway. And I'm like, I think it's about how you get the idea across. That's why I love this. It was so original and unique. It's about the energy that's created in the room at that moment and sharing in that moment. Like, this is the future direction, but it's happening now. I think this is like amazing way of reimagining and rethinking Fashion Week, fashion shows, and presentations beyond the typical like fast-paced, white, minimal environment, high status attendees, you know, strongly enforced exclusion for the catwalk. Those feel like they're designed for like algorithmically decayed short attention spans where it's like boom, model down the runway, boom, model down the runway. This required like much more engagement, right? It was about time time and patience to interact with this art. And I think that that's essential, especially going forward. And we're learning that more and more. I don't know if you guys read art websites, but I read them every day. NFTs and crypto and all this stuff came up, and the art world was always first to embrace it because they're always first to embrace the things that are new and cutting edge. And then they don't talk about any of that anymore. They did the same thing with AI, where they were like, I don't know, we're suspicious, but we don't really know. We don't really get it. Now they're like, no, like there's no point in that. It's not good. It doesn't really make sense. It's taking us away from being human. And I'm like, yeah, you're kind of seeing the outcome of all of this. And it's like, this is something that is antithetical to that. And this is what the future is. They kept saying AI was the future. And now the art world is like, yeah, no, we can see it's not. It's not really even good. And humans are the future. And I'm like, yes. And so I really like this. It was human driven. It also allowed for feedback, which is something only people can do. The chatbot can't laugh. So I love that the show allowed for feedback and this kind of dialogic, critical thought exchange, this collaborative kind of reconstructive way of looking at fashion. I thought it was fab. That was the DAUAN JACARI show at London Fashion Week. So I wrote these on the plane when I was coming home from London. Okay, so we're going to talk about Erin Esch's Spring 2026 show. So these are show notes that I wrote before the show started. So I wrote, there was an insane party DJ. Open bar, much freer, but same casual, real sexy energy as they had at the show at the Tate. I was expecting a menswear forward, jacket heavy, mixed gender runway with impeccable tailoring. Hey, I hope this doesn't feel unprofessional, but my camera deleted all of the parts where I was actually reading off of notes and speaking coherently. If you're always wondering why I talk about him the most, and why he's always the one I'm looking for at London Fashion Week, and it's because he's one of my favorites. Erin Esch is a Central St. Martin's graduate. I think he's from East London, and Central St. Martin's is one of the most prestigious fashion schools in the world. He, in my opinion, whether people realize it or not, what they know, and I think what they like about him, is that he is satisfying this demand for Savile Row tailoring, exceptional craftsmanship and masterful technique, and timeless fashion that represents like subcultures and like the street and the real world. And I really enjoy those parts about his work, and that's what I enjoy about seeing people get dressed in real life as well. Shout out to Biz from NIMPED alumni. I'm really into like photojournalism of fashion and style, and I always take pictures, and I always have, outside of runway shows, of what the attendees are wearing, especially at smaller runway shows, because I really like how real people get dressed and what informs that, especially people who have lives and not just people who are wrapped up within the insular bubbles of the fashion industry. Like, I like people who go to parties and dance and go to the club, and just people who are out in nature. It doesn't have to be, what I like to do, but whatever. I think his work is really enchanting and leaves a really strong impression on the people who see it, because he's striking a really rare balance between impeccable fit and ease. It doesn't look tortured to have this perfected and masterful tailoring, dressmaking, patterning, cutting. It doesn't look tortured. It looks fresh and free and light. There's this really strong essence and aura of ease. You're going to hear Alexander McQueen brought up a lot throughout this, and they're very different designers, Erin Esch and Alexander McQueen, but I really like the intensity and kind of energizing feeling that I get from both of their work. I think he has a really distinct style language, but it feels familiar, which is also fun. I think there's I'm a Libra, so I love all the balance between some of these ideas. I also think that he has a remarkable degree of design prowess and technical perfection. And I'll talk a little bit later about the details that he goes into, and he's kind of masterful at executing the perfect fit. And it comes down to research, I think. And I think that care and consideration for making the clothes and the people who wear them, it reminds me of the way that Peter Doe talks about designing clothes and talking to women about the kind of areas of opportunity and failures of how, certain bags don't zip some way, or, when you wear a top, I hate when it has this extra thing on it. And Peter Doe takes like real people, real women in his life, especially, into consideration when he's designing. And I can tell that Erin Esch does the same, but also that Erin Esch seems really object driven and object oriented, which I really like. I like people who are like obsessive. He seems like the type to be like deconstructing things. And I was also at the FIT library the other day looking at the Margiela replica pieces and how they make like the one-to-ones of like perfect pieces that they found in like a vintage shop or whatever. And that appreciation for effectively executed technique in the past, and the ways that you can like mobilize it into the present which I think present is really key and central, to create this futuristic design language. I think is really central to his brand and his way of designing. I think it's fab. He told Dazed magazine that he's into the really nerdy details of menswear, which I love. That technical perfection and perfectionism can sometimes lend itself to boringness and sameness, though. He can get department stores sometimes when people are too overly critical of, the technical aspect of designing. It can kind of sometimes detach people who are interested in fashion from reality and people and energy and life and spirit. You're worried about making the perfect dress from a technical aspect, but then it's like, okay, but is it cool? Is it fab? Is it fun? Is it exciting to wear? Do people actually want to pull it into their closet? And I think that he's really grounded in the real world. I think Aaron Esch, his work so effectively carves distinguishable characters on the runway that look and feel like real party goers. And each look stands out and has such strength because of that grounding in the real world. Also, I told you we're going to talk about McQueen a bit. John Gosling, who did the music for McQueen runway shows, did Aaron Esch's music at the Tate show. It was at the Tate in London that I went to. Katie England styles his shows. Katie England is like the most legendary, visionary superstar stylist in history. And she is well known for her work with Kate Moss and Alexander McQueen as well. Aaron Esch is also a newgen recipient, and his studio is backed by the Sarah Bond Foundation, which was set up by Alexander McQueen to support creative visionaries and talent. That's according to the face. In terms of his taste level, when I was reading this Culted magazine article for the fall 2024 show, they said, speaking after the show, Esch summed up the Aaron Esch woman, saying, she's hungover in the morning on a Sunday in her hoodie, but she has the Gucci coat on. This is Ollie Cox writing for Culted, and or like interviewing him for Culted, and I'm like, okay, perf, like that's it, that's what I want. This shows like a life lived, a person who's integrated into reality. You're not just making clothes again for the commercial purpose of satisfying an investor and hitting the mark based on the data. This is real stuff for the real world, and I think that's why it elicits this kind of visceral response. He's awakening a kind of subtle association with the early to mid 2000s paparazzi photos as well, of these like elusive style icons, personal style of models off duty. Freya Bea Eriksson, if you know, kind of gives you a peek into the landscape and shape of London nightlife scene, or at least one part of it, right? And I also think it combats time shrink and syphoria, which are what Schumann Bassar writes about in The Age of Earthquakes, which I talk about a lot when I'm working through how to think about Prada and Miu Miu runway shows. In this instance, it's like people hyper optimizing their days and multitasking without down gaps in between their experiences. And then syphoria is like when you mix up the internet with the real world, and it's just this like very disconnected way of existing. I think that his work combats both of those things, and like these overly efficient lives that we're kind of pushed into having at this point. They deprive us of natural flow, and I think that wears on you, and I think that you wear it. Like, I was at the Erica de Cassier concert last night, and I could feel on some people that they feel really grounded and in touch with the way that they fashion identity and how that connects to music and fellowship and being around other people and experiencing, just going out and being at a show and appreciating life and all these different things. And then there are sometimes when I go out and I see people in these really tortured, trendy outfits where I'm like, I get it if you're on TikTok that this would be good for like a sponsored post and it would get the approval from the brand and the client would love it, but this doesn't feel grounded in reality, and I don't want people to have to live like that. It's not their fault that they do. It's just, just how it is. Anyways, Aaron Esch's work conveys a really strong sense of ease because it's grounded in the present. And I think futuristic design and design that leans too heavily on nostalgia, they again feel disconnected and also commercialized, and like you're trying to capitalize on something. And I think the difference between his work is that even if it is referencing different times, it is cross-temporal, and that grounds it in the present, which is like a really weird, again, I'm a Libra, it's like a weird way of creating balance, you know what I mean? According to Vogue, for one of his 2023 shows, he sourced vintage pieces and deconstructed them as a part of his research. And I think that that's like a natural way of learning to design and building a relationship with fashion, but it's also when you maintain that skill and then you have the critical and technical expertise and eye to understand how things are constructed, I think it's a skill that a lot of designers, it falls off, you know? And so I think it's takes a strong level of expertise, actually. It's again, the balance and blend of like naivete and extreme expertise to still rely on investigating and interrogating existing pieces of the wardrobe, to understand what to make for the present. They talk about how he's straddling a fine line of ultra modern sophistication and the raw allure of subcultural icons. And he's like, it's like a bottle of Prosecco, but with a spoon in it. And I just think that that's such a funny way of creating balance. What is your sign, Aaron? I think I like the way that he references the past without it feeling like exhausted ecotourism, which is like when you want to live in the past for a low tech lifestyle. Like when people are like, I want an MP3 player, I don't want to have my phone, and I want a, CD player and all this other stuff. I think it doesn't feel like that kind of performative nostalgia or nostalgic tourism or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I also want an MP3 player, but instead it has this like strong erratic essence that stops you in your tracks, and it kind of forces you to pay attention to it and work to understand it, right? In a hyper-paced world, everything is moving so fast. That's why I think people are looking to the future and looking really far to the past. And I think when he creates this work that feels so modern and present based, I think that that's what helps us slow down, and that's what helps us like reconnect with ourselves and each other. It's very people driven. In terms of the show, he told Dazed, I want there to be a classicism to it. Love that. And this is what I wanted to think and talk through in terms of like the balance between tradition in his work and the new generation and the new vision and the present vision of reality. He does a really good job at balancing tradition in terms of like Savile Row tailoring and all of these conventions of design and frameworks of design, and having so much reverence and respect for them to make these technically perfect clothes, but then at the same time not withdraw himself from making cool things that people actually want to wear and that are based on things that are happening right now, especially in London. He said that he wanted this show to be menswear led as well, and it's showing during like the women's season, which I thought was cool. And his past shows have revealed really beautiful styles on men and women that in both cases, in my opinion, pluralize and broaden how we think of context and how we think of gender and where clothes are situated along both of those axes. But I appreciated him saying that it's also not that deep, and he's not trying to do like subversive, subvert masculine structures of da-da-da-da-da. It's more just about leaning into what works for him. He talks about how it's like instinctive style. And I'll touch on that later, but I really appreciate that as well, because even if that's not the intention to like subvert masculine structures, I think his work does. And I think that that's what makes it so brilliant and rooted in people in the present. In terms of collaborations for the show, he collaborated with his family friend, Charlie Allen, who's a Savile Row tailor who tailored his father's wedding suit. And that is, again, another testament, you guys, to his commitment to perfected tailoring, of course, but also community. Hello. And I also don't care that community is like an overused term. I'm so tired of people saying it's an overused term. That's an overused expression. For him, it's not about inviting influencers to a brand activation dinner, right? Where nobody ever speaks again, but you all take pictures and you post it online so that you can have that association with the brand and they can capitalize on your social capital and vice versa. This is about real life and real connections and being interwoven into a lifestyle and a community, rather than like lifestyle concept clothes being pitched in a brand meeting and you know what I mean? Also, Osman Ahmed did the show notes, and I think she's done them before. And I also believe that Aaron and Osman Ahmed are close. Ahmed just did the interview for him about the All Saints appointment that Aaron just got, which is also very exciting and something I need to talk about in my next video. Also, his collection, like I said, was styled by Katie England, who, again, collaborated with him for spring 2025. She's a legendary superstar visionary stylist who's known mostly for her work with Alexander McQueen. Her son, Lux, is Aaron Esch's muse. So you'll see throughout this that everything is interwoven and connected. Everything is always connected. He takes inspiration, he says, from how Lux dresses. He says out loud, like, we should make that when he sees Lux walk into the room, according to Daniel Rogers at Vogue, which shout out to Daniel Rogers at Vogue. Instead of creating design fantasies and selling them to people by contriving, this whole advertising sales pitch that, other brands are doing, he's synthesizing what actually works already and that he knows and is evidenced to work on him. He's like, it worked for me. I like it. Let's make it. You know what I mean? And I think that again grounds us back so deeply into reality. And it's like what he likes from the past, what he likes from the real world, and how it allows him to envision, the world that we have now for design. And that's why I feel so rich and has such depth, because that's where it's taking from. He collaborated between Lux and Wolf Gillespie for their club night post party, and you can see on the caps shown throughout the show. Lux also did the music coordination for this show, which was really cool and central to it. And that's similar to DAUAN JACARI. I feel like Aaron Esch only recreates and invites you into his world rather than inventing a world to sell you into something oriented around like commercial fashion sales and all these things. It's more participatory and dialogic. It's more like a back and forth, and it's palpably real. And I think music and fellowship and community being central to Aaron Esch's work are why it feels so much more real. We're all just at like the Aaron Esch party. And I think my thesis, I know that this is long, but I think my thesis is that's why I like Aaron Esch. Like, that's why I feel so drawn to Aaron Esch's work and DAUAN JACARI's work and very few others. But I feel like this may be the new vision of streetwear. We've kind of reduced and exhausted that term. Like, that's an actual term that was exhausted, but we've reduced streetwear to very specific symbols in fashion, like an oversized $800 hoodie, completely divorced from its history and turned into this like luxury fashion term for overpriced, low quality sweatpants. The point of streetwear was to reflect and amplify how a subcultural community was dressing and living, like their entire lifestyle, the whole ecosystem around what they were doing beyond just getting dressed, and reflect that in not only fashion and clothes, reflecting and amplifying how the subcultural community dresses, and then inspiring that community to dress even better using your technique or design prowess or agenda setting and inventive styling and abilities and ability to refashion the things that people in your community are already doing, right? That's what streetwear originally was, and that it was completely co-opted and then taken, and that we have pockets of this still today, even if we don't realize that we do. And again, back to the idea of like him saying the goal was not about like pluralizing menswear, but the outcome was that he did. It's because I think that there's a freeing and liberatory aspect to what he was saying about how it's more about like instinctive dressing and instinctual. It's just whatever comes up to him naturally. That does pluralize and subvert and broaden what menswear is, because men are, confined to really restrictive, limiting structures that guide them to limit themselves to these tiny boxes and limit other men to these tiny boxes. And I think, the instinctive dressing is freeing. And that's what I think Aaron Esch's work does. It's very freeing, and it's not desperate or forced, fussy or forced is a good thing. It was a slip of the tongue, but it's not forced, it's not fussy. And I think that that's the ease of authenticity, and that kind of stuff comes naturally for some people because that's their natural way. So those are just my thoughts on Aaron Esch. This is 20 minutes. That's crazy. Okay, the next show that we're talking about at London Fashion Week is Lucila Safdie's Tristes Imperial. This is a collection that's a sustained reflection on nostalgia and cycles of obsession within the realm of forgotten truth or dares, bubblegum whispers, and coarse-brushed hair. What I wrote about what this show symbolically represented to me was that it, to me, feels like this broader idea. Like, you could compare it to the Side Girls, or what was that movie in the 2010s on Netflix? To me, it's like teen girls sharing a mirrored experience is what I pulled out as the most significant aspect of this. Like, that was the thing that I highlighted. To me, it focuses more on the rituals of coming of age rather than the artifacts of coming of age and girlhood. And I think that that's why it lands better than the I'm just a girl and like Barbie's thing from the past, which I think we've kind of progressed from, like post Barbie movie, post I'm just a girl industrial complex, post pseudo feminism, apolitical navigating. I think that we kind of should be thinking more deeply about like rituals, process, community, fellowship, and things like that, rather than just like artifacts and symbols, because that's what it led to the commercialization of all of those different things and the depoliticizing of kind of feminism, and instead turning it into just like what objects can we acquire to represent that we are a part of, loving girls or being a girl's girl vibes. Like, this is less vibe based and more like, human. I think it signifies a culture, right? A process that's shared like shared acts that exist outside of the realm of consumption and being able to buy into something. Like, you're not a girl's girl or just a girl because you have the same insert girly designer object. You're a girl's girl because of the actions that you take and the rituals that you take process in, and how you share that with other women. And that's why I don't even like the term girl's girl. It doesn't exist in my reality. But do you understand what I'm saying? The idea of like grooming oneself, caring for a friend and grooming her, obsessing, self-interrogating, scrutinizing, and inventing oneself, even finding pleasure in beautifying and self-construction, like all shared experiences that exist beyond era-based nostalgia or the designer's capacity to personalize their experience of girlhood. That's another part of it, is like girlhood. There are like more universal rituals of girlhood than buying specific 90s nostalgia objects, because not everybody grew up in the 90s. You know, and not everybody could afford those objects. Not everybody even desired those objects. And I think it's more important now to talk about like things like the internet, which is more universalizing and globalized, et cetera, where these intangible ideas and rituals can show up, rather than like personalizing the idea of girlhood and then being like, I'm sharing that back to you to tell you this is the universal experience. It's not, and that's okay. You know, it's fun to hear people storytell and see people storytell about their own childhood, though, for sure. Hello, that sense of authorship and subjectivity is essential in design, but when we're speaking about universal experiences, I think it's okay to have more universalizing representations rather than personalized ones. When the show notes reference the desire for belonging, it's clear from this presentation that lucila safdie's work exists as a conversation and a dialogue rather than a monologue about the perfect past and, you know, trying to tap back into it. It's much more conversational, it feels, and it works to acknowledge the past, present, and future and patterns of behavior that we engage in, partly because we have to, right? And I think that's what unites us, is like being compelled to have to acknowledge all those parts of ourselves. And that's what unites us in this kind of shared experience, that regardless of time, age, era, or the kind of childhood that you have, we all recognize and identify with these like rituals and processes that we were subjected to. And also the aesthetic references and taste, I think, similarly acknowledge a shared understanding. Like this one is around the sensibilities, like Mears mentions in her work. Like, I like the hot pink and stripes and polka dot industrial complex and ballet flats and mid-2000s kind of girly fashion that is really popular right now. And I think referencing that is a good way of acknowledging shared sensibilities, especially those that are showing up online really consistently, right? It's a good way of doing it, instead of being like, remember when we all wanted a Poochie doll? So in terms of setting, it was set in a teenage bedroom, essentially. It was very Tumblr vibes. Like the visual representation was so easy and beautiful to capture, and the way that everybody has captured it just looks so great. So it was a teenage bedroom that was dressed up like a girl's dormitory or sister's bedroom, like the reference from the story, designed by Amy Strickland. There are these two twin-sized beds that are sitting next to each other, decorated with each girl's tools for getting ready. lucila safdie's designs hang on the wall behind them and are laid out on the bed. You have models grabbing them to change from look to look. There's this natural light that was pouring in from the right side. It was so kind of like how it's pouring in from the left side on my side. I also enjoyed the accessories that created these pops of color. I thought that created a really nice dimension. The jewelry was by Elza White, and the makeup artist was Mary Arter. I loved both. I thought that they were both so essential, so nostalgic, but also future forward. Like, it's a good nostalgic reference to progress into the future, kind of like the 2010s, 80s reference, where everything was like hot pink and bright yellow and electric. Rihanna had a lot of fashion, right? Like then at the time, that Cassie did a lot of the stuff at the time, that it just seemed so futuristic. And I'm glad that we're having more visions and representations of like futurism and hope and optimism in fashion. Models were staring into mirrors, handheld and floor mirrors, and they were sitting faced away from each other in antique chairs. In terms of the presentation, models were draped in these Elza White pearls and mid-2000s MySpace makeup looks. They were dressing and undressing, aiding each other in getting ready. The movement artistry seemed so tender. It was like an older sister or cousin, best friend helping you get ready to take MySpace pictures or go out or, you know, walk around the neighborhood looking cute. It was so precious. There was a balance between full comfort and contemplation and how each model was moving, right? You could sense that each girl felt safe to try on a new look, but then they would immediately stand in the mirror or grab a hand mirror and self-groom in a way that makes it unclear if they were satisfied that they had constructed this like new self, or if they were still resolving how they felt about themselves, which is something that teen girls do endlessly. especially when you're amongst other girls. And it looks like they envisioned this dream girl fantasy, which I love. And then they were seeing, did I properly execute it? Did I hit the mark? The looks were so romantic and cute and feminine and coded for girls, by girls. It felt very 2006, online fashion, mall fashion, Delia's, Bratz dress-up game coded. It was very 2010s hipster coded in terms of rejecting objectification while highlighting female beauty and sexiness. Like the blogger era, one thing I really liked about it is that women were free to be sexy and talk about even and kind of be gross even on their blogs, and they had complete control over their authorship, which was so different to magazines where they were led by like these very wealthy nepo babies and men very often in terms of like directing and leading the way that women are allowed to be represented. It was so new and like liberating, this way of taking ownership over how we tell our own stories. And I felt like the hipster era was very good for allowing people to fashion identity in a way that was humanizing. And I like this weird chaotic color combo thing that we're doing now in ballet flats and all these things that are like man repelling. And I said that this would happen when it came to the revival of Los Angeles apparel, American apparel, industrial complex. I already said that this would happen because one thing about me, I be knowing, but I'm just happy to see it. Okay. And then in terms of girlhood, there's a story of girlhood that's deep and complex, and it's more reverential, I think, than we've seen in recent years. The idea of like teen girls sharing a mirrored experience. This alone reveals that the designer has an interest in sharing girlhood. Girlhood is to share. Girlhood is to reflect upon. It's unlike constructing the nostalgic simulacrum of girlhood, which can be alienating, and it hits such a sweet spot, right? Because it reflects broader culture. It reaches out to it, it touches it, it brings it in, and then it links us in together. Questioning and doubting your vision, even in a realized fashion fantasy, you want to understand yourself. And I think that that's the universal experience that it depicts. And you want to look for pleasure in getting dressed, and that's what it depicts. And worrying about scrutiny and dreaming and feeling it and staying up, feeling the fantasy with friends. Like, I think it's fab, and I liked this. The next show we're going to look at is Yuhan Wang's Spring 2026 show. Called Armor of Roses. This is Armor of Roses by Yuhan Wang. This one was set, kind of looked like a school or like an auditorium type place that it was set in. It was very bright. So in terms of the thesis for this runway show, I think that this collection returns us to like the spring 2023 era of runway that kind of worked to complicate the experiences of womanhood simultaneously. Like it opens a door to the question of how we blur real experiences of navigating as a woman through violence and like and things like this, and the realities of what it's like to be a woman, and also the private self that we construct, like how you build your sense of self, not like mentally but also just like aesthetically, and then what we choose to reveal to the world after we've perfected and beautified ourselves on the outside. And then we're entering the truth, which is like that the world is complicated and ugly and evil and chaotic. I think Sandy Liang at New York Fashion Week does shows that represent more than they do resolve, and I think that's part of way of acknowledging that some of these things are not resolvable. And she acknowledges that. She says like sometimes she represents toys that she couldn't get when she was younger and things like that. I think it's important to represent things like that and not to say, and now I have it and now it's all better, because it's a way of saying like it's not all better. It's fun to have now, but it's not all better. I think it's interesting to see something different here, which is like this through line story of women try to protect themselves. And, you would expect that softness means that women can't protect themselves, but they work to try to. But it's also just like the Mulholland Drive story. It's like you work to try to, but then the world will show you what the world is. And it's confusing, it's sad, it makes no sense. You're disillusioned, but then you're also just like, did that even happen? It's so confusing. And I think that's really important. I was reading Fashion Desire and Anxiety, and it mentioned fashion assuaging the monotony of existence and the pressures of work and the alienating effect of anonymous city life. And I think this picks up where the 2023 shows left off in terms of creating a complicated wearable fantasy, That's what this is. It's a complicated wearable fantasy. It reminds me of what I said about Sandy Liang at the time, which is that you're in this difficult, life and work-life balance, and you want to tap into some idea of fantasy. And I don't think that that's unreasonable for women to want to do. And we need protection from it. Even though we're doing all this work to beautify our appearance, we know that we're not going into the fantasy world that we're creating on our bodies. Like the body is the site of the fantasy. The real world is not going to reflect that. It's not something that we're looking into. So that we're doing all this work in the mirror. Okay, I'm getting to the point. Anyways, we need protection from it. And we are also generally like equipped to fight back against it. in order to maintain the pleasure that we find in beautifying, right? Because if you're getting dressed every day, you're putting on makeup, doing your hair every day, generally you've had to build up a sense of like reacting to being sexually harassed and bothered and, you know, fatigued by the ways of the world and mistreated. And you do have to build that kind of strength and armor up, and callousing even up, in order to maintain pleasure in beauty and your sensuality, when pleasure can't be derived from other parts of your life. Like you can't, you know, necessarily get pleasure in capitalism from your workplace. You look for pleasure in beautifying and perfecting yourself, but you know that it's not real. It's like this very complicated kind of back and forth, which I think is a parallel to their reference, this collection, which was Mulholland Drive, right? So you're kind of dressing to acknowledge those complications of the fantasy of safety as a woman, and avoiding alienation in city life by cultivating and establishing, you know, your sense of style. This is the way to find fellowship with others, or create a sense of self, or feel like you're not just another number in a big city or at a job, etc., etc. It's a way of like establishing, you know, your uniqueness, but it's such a complicated thing, and it's so tied to womanhood. And, you know, I feel like in the spring 2023, 2022-ish era of shows, it was kind of like the just a girl, I'm just a girl kind of era. And I think the show is more complicated than it seems. In terms of the show, it felt like a familiar romantic girly pop essence of Yuhan Wang's typical work. There were these like flouncy tiered ruffles, these lacy hosiery moments kind of paired with these doll-like shoes, which we've seen before, the short heels, the recital piano music. It was just an interesting juxtaposition against the frilly bloomers and the micro bags, against like steel armor and the car crash and things like this. I think it speaks to the reference and the idea of indiscernibility between your identity and where you end and where you begin. And I don't know if I talked about this on this channel, but the Dew Point artwork piece, do you guys remember the Dew Point? Maybe I didn't talk about it on here, but there's this work of art that I'll cite, obviously, about the Dew Point, and it's like the space between like reality and fiction when you're entering online spaces, and like the ways that we interpret being on the internet. Like you're in real life, but then you're going through the screen, which is like mediating your experience of being online. But like being online, like what is that? Like there's a space in between. It talks about like the space between where it splits, where Yuhan Wang describes a point of departure. And maybe this is Yuhan Wang highlighting the trouble that your beauty can get you in, and it can show how it seems like vapid, frivolous, and things like that, and it makes you vulnerable to predators, but at least you have a say in like the ways that you work to intentionally wield your beauty, and so that you have more control and like you're more protected and you have, you know, your armor in that way, compared to the fact that like you don't actually have that control. And I don't know, it's just an interesting way of complicating beauty and the ways that women use it. I think it's a much more nuanced representation of the complicated nature of womanhood than the more rugged appearing shows, and it's a more honest representation of women's place in it as trying to find strength in imperfect dreams and the effect of, you know, those experiences on them as a result, rather than representing strength wholly or certainly, and or even just representing vulnerability and innocence wholly or certainly. Like I do think it's important to acknowledge that like beautifying or self-perfecting or aligning with hegemonic standards of beauty, like it doesn't go the way that you think it will. You're not like going to get a job or get your nose done, get your lips done, and then you get unlocked access to all these other things. And it's not to say that it doesn't give you privilege to have closer proximity to desirability, but it's like the point of privilege is that it doesn't mean your life is perfect. It means that you have more access to power than someone who doesn't have those things. But privilege is not about, oh, you have a perfect life. It's like you don't have to have a perfect life. You just have more access to like material like gain and power and things like that. And I think sometimes when it comes to womanhood, we don't really talk about all of those complications, because we do want to reduce things sometimes in a way, like I do want to reduce things sometimes to acknowledge like disempowerment and the people who don't have that kind of access. But you know, I think it's interesting to complicate it. It's a fashion house that was founded in 2018 as the 2010s feminist discourse was transforming into, you know, political online discourse, and then over time has transformed out of that into more of an apolitical, online only, reductive conversation. I also noticed that Fashion Desire and Anxiety mentioned a blurring of sex, violence, lust, eroticism, and I think about armor and protection from evils, and this idea of creating a lustful and sensual aestheticized escape from working in a city as a woman, creating a space to establish harmony between your private self and your, you know, public self. Do you know what I mean? Your ability to beautify and partake in beautifying processes that, you know, allow you for a sense of aspiration in your daily routine. You're navigating a world that may not exist, and the reality that you have to prepare for when you're doing all of those things. I don't know, I just thought it was a very interesting, an interesting story to tell. I didn't think I needed some of the direct references to Mulholland Drive to kind of drive the point home. I liked the more conceptual ways of communicating this story, but what did you guys think about this show? I don't think I got show notes from, but it was Johanna Parv during 2026. It was this sporty neutral color palette, like almost solemn acknowledgement of the state of the world in terms of the colors. They look like London weather. There was a short runway for this runway show. There was only 21 looks, I think, and it was functional for a stylish cyclist, which I've been thinking about lately because I really want to start cycling, but I'm very scared. I live in New York City. I don't want to ride bikes with these people. In a perfect world, yes, but I just really don't like the way that people treat people and drive here. It's just getting more dangerous, it feels. Okay, so in terms of possible meanings that I was able to discern from this, she says that technical fabrics and construction are meant to protect you from the elements. And then you see this bag covering the chest, and then the bag in look 6 hung around the model's neck with a double layered coat. To me, it points to this idea of needing protection and security that you're not necessarily finding elsewhere. When you think about how hostile the world is, it's no surprise that someone would be considering those things. It may connect to the dark, dense, cloudy weather color palette, which could be a reflection of the times, like leaning on opportunities for self-expression to feel like you're in control and respond to how like cloudy things feel. You know, having protection in terms of the tech built into the fabrics and garments that you're building, or having outside hobbies like cycling, or like practices like cycling and rituals that, you know, contribute to you clearing your mind and your own mental and physical health. But the first time I went to Paris, I put my Burberry purse on, and then I put my trench coat over it because I didn't want anybody to see that I had a purse, because I just didn't want people to steal from me. And I've never been stolen from in Paris, but it's like, that's how you have to act. You're like putting your bag forward so that your hands are closer to it on the train and things like this. And it's like this intense feeling of surveillance and insecurity. Like, that's exactly how I felt. And so when I saw the bags set up as like chest rigs or hung on the front, I'm like, maybe this is functional for cycling, which I have seen cycling bags that are worn on the front, and also because you're able to get things out of it while you're cycling, but it also just might be connected to a broader story. So I also went to the Sinead Gorey show, and it was about proposing a new mode of party dressing, which helped me understand a lot of the like party culture in London and kind of like the broad spectrum of it. Because keep in mind, the strongest introduction that I have to like party fashion in London is, or like would be, the Moa Lola show and then the Iranesh show. So that's kind of like the party goers and like crowd and environment that I'm familiar with, and then the aesthetics that I'm familiar with. And I went to the Iranesh show this season as well, so it was cool to see a different side of the spectrum of party fashion and party clothes. That was my wrap of London Fashion Week. So I just want to say I'm very thankful for everything. Love you guys so much. Thank you for allowing me to go to London Fashion Week and any fashion week and any fashion show. Thank you to the people that say hello to me. Thank you to the people who work PR, and yeah, I love you guys. And I'm doing the Paris wrap, but then I also have some like theoretical and conceptual things to say about things. I also have some like not so nice hot takes. Oh, yeah, but yeah, that's it. Love you. Loved Iranesh. Iranesh, best show ever. DAUAN JACARI and Iranesh are my top 2 picks. That's my big reflection in terms of shows that I went to. I loved it. I thought it was fab, and I'll talk about the other shows that I didn't go to in another video. Wrapping all of fashion.